Welcome to the third season of the Stronger Than Autoimmune podcast. As an autoimmune warrior myself, I understand living with chronic illness isn't easy. You're not alone. This podcast is made to give hope. I will interview individuals living with autoimmunity along with experts and businesses to help provide knowledge and support. As a health coach, I understand there is no cure for autoimmune disease, but creating small changes to lifestyle can influence how we feel. And shout out to all my listeners out there because this podcast is made possible by you. And how can you support? Glad you asked. There are 3 ways to show your support. 1, rate the show on Spotify. 2, leave a review through Apple. And 3, share the episode with a warrior so they too can have hope and be stronger than autoimmune. And enough of this intro, let's get started. Hello, autoimmune fans. Welcome to the Stronger Than Autoimmune podcast. I have Carrie Bailey here. She is a highly skilled and compassionate certified functional nutritionist. She is dedicated to helping clients heal anxiety and depression through highly personalized dietary and supplement approach. Miss Bailey is your go-to resource for cutting-edge evidence-based nutrition. So join us as we uncover the powerful connection between nutrition and mental well-being and discover actionable steps to cultivate a healthier mind and body. Hello, Miss Carrie. Thank you for joining me on the Stronger Than Autoimmune podcast.
Hi, Desiree. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So where are you connected?
I am about 50 miles south of San Francisco in a little town called Santa Clara in the heart of the Silicon Valley, which I'm sure you know of. If you know Facebook and Google, I'm right there among all of those guys.
Yeah. Well, welcome. Yeah, it's earlier there. I'm in Texas, so it's a little bit later. And it's amazing that we could connect today.
Really excited to be here.
From my understanding is that you were a business analyst before you became a certified functional nutritionist. And you've been a certified functional nutritionist for 10 years. What made you do the shift or change?
Such a great question. I've always been interested in health. Excuse me. I've always been interested in health. And I was young. I always wanted to be a mom. So even though I was in the corporate world, I was an accountant, and then I morphed into this liaison between IT and finance, and that was the business systems analyst. And when I was doing that work, it was great. But then once I was a mom, it was way too much and too stressful. So after I had my second baby, I said, that's it. I'm done. I'm not going to do this work anymore. And then, of course, I was busy with them. And then I was just always Googling different things. And I remember one day I was Googling, what does a 5-year-old get a kidney infection? I was just really curious to me. And so I Googled it. And then I was like, gosh, there's got to be a school out there, something for me to find. And so I found the Institute for Integrative Nutrition on Googling. And I was like, wow, I can do this at home with the kids. No big deal. So that was the beginning of my journey. And so then, many certificates later, I became a functional nutritionist and love helping people.
Yeah. And it sounds like it really started with your children's health journey, them being sick.
Yeah. There was actually
that
my
uncovered
friend's
this.
it was a friend's child. She was 5 years old and she had a kidney infection. I was like, how does she get a kidney infection? So, kind of got into the anatomy, physiology, like what is a kidney infection? Why does someone get it? And just got curious.
Curiosity is what creates so many jobs, so many answers, creates technology. And it sounds like you have that curiosity gene.
I do.
And talk about genes. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, right? And actually that's what really makes a certified nutritionist different from a dietitian. Do you mind sharing?
Yeah, for sure. As a functional nutritionist, we're looking at the whole person. We're understanding their whole story all the way back to like how they were born. We're looking at all their signs and symptoms. We're looking at their blood work. If you do any kind of lab work, we can do stool tests and things like that. So we're looking at everything, every sign and symptom about them. And then we're coming up with a very personalized plan. And in functional nutrition, what we're doing is actually we're healing the person more than we are healing their ailments, right? But we're using food as medicine. And so we're coming up with a personalized plan that includes not only what to eat, but what not to eat, right? And then on the what to eat, it's usually very specific foods that are healing foods. And for me, my approach might be a little bit different than other functional nutritionists, but I use like a little bit of food combining, like what foods to eat together for optimal digestion and absorption, and what foods not to eat together. And it also turns down the signs and symptoms. And then we also bring in supplements to address nutritional deficiencies. And then we also will do any lifestyle stuff. Like I might suggest an Epsom salt bath, right, to help absorb the minerals and the sulfate. And then I might suggest, sun meditate. I call it my sun meditation, where you have them go outside, get the sun in their eyes, ground, right, lie on a blanket in the ground like we used to do in the 80s, and get some sun, right, and get their vitamin D the natural way, like 10 minutes on each side. So I might just recommend everything. So it goes way beyond nutrition. It's really a whole body focused kind of solution.
Wow. Sounds fun. Sounds very like you're really digging into the weeds and trying to figure out how to really help the person and combine things that are really needed to create a more healthier lifestyle. What, as far as since you were a business analyst before, how do you use that work into your certified functional nutritionist career now?
Such a great question, because it's funny but it seems like they would have nothing to do with each other, but they actually have a lot. So in the work that I did, I was always supporting users, and they're like, this happened, I did this, and it did this. And so there's always a lot of problem solving in it. So you had to get curious, you had to test things, you had to replicate things, and you're trying to solve the problem. So I sort of joke that I went sort of from computer systems to human systems, right? And getting into how does your immune system work and your gastrointestinal system work? And how does your brain work? And how do all those things work? So just kind of went from computers to humans, still using curiosity and problem solving as the core solution.
And you seem to specialize in more depression, anxiety, and people that have bipolar. What is the common denominator that you are seeing?
That's great. Great question. Now, although I'm seeing a common denominator, I would say that each person's depression is a little bit different. So if you came to me, if three different people came to me with depression, I am going to look at the root causes, which again is some underlying pathogen and toxins, but it can also be, traumatic events and traumatic loss and stress in their lives. There can be a lot of factors there. But each person with depression is going to have come about it in a different way. So you might see that they had amalgam fillings so that you suspect there's a lot more mercury. So we need to pull out the mercury. And then somebody else might have depression in addition to autoimmune. And it's always interesting to me because most people that come to me have anxiety and depression. Almost every person has one or more of those symptoms, but they might also have autoimmune symptoms as well. And so again, usually it's not just those in isolation. So we're looking at the whole underlying picture of someone and how they got to be there.
Okay. So it's more pathogens or something that doesn't belong there, and you're trying to remove it or detoxify that thing there.
Exactly.
All right. And what is really the science behind mental health issues? Because it's not, they used to think there was some type of serotonin, you don't have enough serotonin or dopamine. But from my understanding, I heard it's a little bit more deeper than that. Could you explain?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple different factors involved. It's the central nervous system, right, which can be overstimulated and irritated, if you will. But part of the central nervous system are your neurotransmitters. That's how they communicate from neuron to neuron to do different actions, right? You've got different parts of your nervous system, but the neurotransmitters, what happens is they can be deficient because of diet and everything else that's going on, the pathogens and toxins that are underground, right? It can be interfered with by neurotoxins, which again, the pathogens and toxins are at play there. And so you might have not enough not enough neurotransmitters. So you might not have enough serotonin, enough dopamine, or an imbalance in those two. Or it could be that the analogy I like to make is the neurons communicate by going from cell to cell, but it's sort of like your car going down the road, right? So you might have, if you have a cement smooth road with no bumps, you're going to be fine, right? Your neurotransmitters are going to be able to go boom, 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 and communicate quickly and get through. But if you have potholes or you have landslides or you have a bumpy road, your car, if the car is a neurotoxin, might actually go off the road and not even make it to the next neurotransmitter. So you would lose it, right? Or it kind of goes in the wrong place, or the signal gets blocked or interfered with. And so that's part of that, right? And so that's really how your central nervous system works. And also, these pathogens I see this a lot, is really interfere with the nervous system. And in the case of anxiety, sometimes I meet a lot of people these days the anxiety actually comes from the physiological place, right? So it's like in their head, they're like, they had a great upbringing, everything's perfect, their family's perfect, their great marriage, great work, no financial issues. And then they have this problem, right? And if it's an anxiety or depression, you have to think what else is going on in their body. And it can be that these nerves get inflamed, right? And then that can impact the vagus nerve, which is a really long nerve that impacts your digestive system and your heart. And so if you start getting heart palpitations, of course, you're going to get freaked. That's going to freak you out. You're like, oh my God, am I having a heart attack, right? And so that almost creates an anxiety in and of itself. Yeah. And then you can have the other kinds of anxiety where it's a buildup in the system from the physiological stuff where it creates concern about, going out in the world, right? Like, how do I function in the world when I've got this stuff going on? Right? So it just depends on what the whole picture, right? Not just the anxiety or the depression.
Interesting. It sounds like it could be one or the other. It starts off physiological and then it becomes more affecting your overall health, your mental health, or it can go from the pathogens affecting your physiology. Is that
Exactly. Yeah.
correct?
If you as a child, right, you're abused or you have trauma and stress as a child, that's going to deplete you and make you more susceptible to having anxiety and depression, right? So it could start there and lead into something more physiological, or it could go the other way around to something physiological that turns into more mental emotion.
Okay. And let me connect these dots here because, okay, how does fixing your nutrition, what you put in your body, help with the dopamine or the, serotonin or those?
Yeah, for sure. So the pathogens are usually, again, it depends on how you acquired them. Like I have a client right now who acquired Epstein-Barr when he was 17, but then he has signs and symptoms even when he was 10 years old, just weird signs and symptoms that it was like, okay, well, maybe this Epstein-Barr has been in your body the whole time. And now he's 70 years old and he's had chronic fatigue this whole time. So now I'm getting distracted what your question was. So tell me again your question. So I'm going off with some story and then I'm like,
oh, yeah. No worries. I was just trying to connect the dots because it seems like how do pathogens affect dopamine or the serotonin in your brain or affect the whole body? I guess that's what I'm not connecting myself.
Yeah. So the pathogens are, right. So anytime you have bacteria in your body, they are living off of you and creating waste, right? They create waste inside you. And then that waste can become a neurotoxin, right? And so if that is a neurotoxin in your body, so the end goal, oversimplify it, I guess. The end goal is to reduce the number of viruses, reduce the number of unwanted bacteria, increase the number of good bacteria, because the good bacteria helps you make vitamins and helps you do, we know about the gut microbiome where it's really helping us make neurotransmitters and helping us make the nutrients for it to build new neurotransmitters. So our goal in bringing in foods is to twofold, is to kill any kind of pathogens and toxins that are in there, as well as feeding the good bacteria. Because really the good bacteria, a lot of times people use probiotics, but probiotics don't feed the good bacteria. What feeds the good bacteria are your fruits and vegetables. And so by feeding the good bacteria, you're increasing the amount. And then also, if you stop feeding the unwanted bacteria and pathogens by taking out certain foods, and you're sort of starving them, so they're going to die. So it's this natural progression of, you think of the scale, right? It's like, okay, you get the good and the bad. Just oversimplify good and bad, right? They all have a place. For good and bad, you want to decrease the bad, increase the good, right? To eliminate symptoms.
Got you. Thank you for connecting that dot. I didn't understand how that worked in the body, but now completely makes sense. And as far as the similarities between, is there any similarities between, a lot of people may suffer from brain fog and think, well, I'm just getting old, or, I honestly have had brain fog, since I was younger, like 14.
Wow.
Or in college. And is there any link between brain fog and mental health issues?
For sure. They're both the brain, right? And they really have their roots in the same thing, right? So brain fog is, in case your audience doesn't know, brain fog is that it's like your brain is blocked, like you can't think, like you can't come up with a word, you can't think clearly, that you're kind of lost, right? You're like, wait, what did you say, kind of thing? And it's like the neurotransmitter that fell off the track, right? It's that communication isn't getting through. And so it can affect memory and everything. And brain fog and mental health are the same, have the same base, right? The same underlying root cause of neurotoxins, right? What I generally see, so I see a lot of people with long COVID, and long COVID is either COVID that kind of went down but didn't go away totally, or there is a theory that this long COVID is a bunch of viruses that came up. And so with brain fog, I definitely see a viral load that's at play that needs to be reduced. That's what I see. And then again, I do see, anxiety and depression, whether it's mood. Again, we still don't we don't really understand what impacts mood, but the way the brain works, you've got mood in there and you've got, the way you think, right? And those all work together. And then there's something else I was going to say about that. If it starts as the brain fog, right? You can't think. It can create can create the anxiety and depression, in that if you can't eat well or function well, it's going to impact you from maybe the way you do your work, or going out into social situations if you're embarrassed by that, or if you're avoiding social situations, which then again is going to be like, put you in isolation, which could put you into depression. But it's going to make you avoid certain things because you start losing confidence in yourself, right? Especially if you're like me and you're raised like your brain is important. And how did you forget that? How did you miss that, right? And making mistakes. If you've got some of that identity stuff underneath, and having the brain fog can definitely lead to anxiety and depression, more from almost the mental emotional part, but you've got the physiological part too. It's really such a gray, complicated area that you really almost have to just hear someone's story to connect the dots to figure out, well, how did their brain fog come about, and how did their anxiety and depression come about? That makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm thinking also you may think that you have a bigger illness like Alzheimer's or losing your mind, or you know what I mean, if you're older,
Yeah.
and it may getting the right nutrition, or you may have a pathogen like you were talking about, or a neurotoxin. Is there certain genes that are more prone to mental health issues that you've noticed? Because you do work with different genes, correct?
Yeah. I've done a lot of work with genes. What I've come to realize, even though you kind of look at someone's genes and try to understand them, in the end, it's much more about epigenetics than it is about genetics. Okay, so probably the most popular, well-known gene is the MTHFR gene, right? And so about half the population have the MTHFR gene. But other people who are very sick don't have the MTHFR gene. Like, I am a great example of that. I don't have MTHFR, but I've been struggling with my health since I was a kid. And so had all kinds of weird signs and symptoms of things. And again, I'm the perfect like weird mystery symptoms that I have to be my own health detective for. But I don't have MTHFR, but there's 5 genes in that pathway. So to get from, you eat your leafy greens in order to make methylfolate, which is what you need to methylate, to make, to detoxify, to make neurotransmitters, to get rid of neurotransmitters, to make hormones, to get rid of hormones. That process is so critically important. In order for that process to work, methylfolate is MTHFR is just the last step. There's still 4 other genes ahead of it. And for me, those 4 other genes are slow, even though I don't have MTHFR. But I've seen other people where they didn't have a problem, but they're still sick because, again, it sort of predisposes you to it, but it's not everything. It's the epigenetics is much more important, is what you've been exposed to, the toxins and pathogens and things like that, and what's the story of your life, of the traumas and all those things, much more important than epigenetics.
Gotcha. So it seems like just because you have the MTHFR gene, right? I said that right? That you can still control your lifestyle and, live a pretty good life.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I've met people with had MTHFR, but they've living a healthy lifestyle and they're healthy, right? And I've met other people that don't, like myself, that don't have the MTHFR gene that are really, really sick, again, because they were exposed to toxins and things like that. Like I have a client who works for the airlines, and the trick with the airlines is you've got this, exposure to the gas and the fuel all the time, and then the radiation. And of course, some people are more susceptible to that than others, but was her story, is she got exposed to the fuel and the toxins and the radiation, being at elevation and flying. It weakened her body. She was already probably susceptible to those things, but those are the things that made her sick, and she didn't have MTHFR.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
How about autoimmune disease? Is there any certain genes that make you more susceptible to having autoimmune disease, or you really think it's more of lifestyle?
I really think it's more lifestyle. Again, from what I've seen, there's nothing that is predisposing that I can see. Again, we've, I've worked with naturopaths and different people that study genes, and it really isn't. I really don't, not seeing the connection. You can still use food to heal, which is great. And you can really support the immune system and improve the immune system and make things better for all.
Yeah. How about, because we talked about links between mental health issues and, depression and how that works with brain fog. But how about the link between mental health and autoimmune diseases?
That's such a great
Since
question.
You do work with people that have autoimmune diseases.
Yeah. Oh, I have a great example, which is my dad. So my dad struggled with, in his younger years, it was alcoholism and smoking and things like that. But then what it sort of caught up with him later in his life. And so later he was diagnosed with anxiety, depression, PhD, and bipolar. And so I think my mom landed on that that bipolar was the answer. And I'm like, well, technically he could have had all of those, right? They're all just variations on the spectrum. And so he had all of those disorders. And then later in his life, he was diagnosed with COPD, likely, again, sort of vulnerability of starting with smoking for many years and, whatever else is going on in his body. And then also getting rheumatoid arthritis, right? And then when he was on rheumatoid arthritis, getting all those chemo drugs that are really, really hard on the body. And those chemo drugs can actually increase the pathogens in the body. It's like, I don't know how it works exactly, but it just creates more pathogens when you have those because it kind of kills everything. So it feels like it's killing more of the good bacteria and allowing the bad viruses to grow in the body. And so for him, it was mental health leading to autoimmune. But I've seen it the other way around too. I've seen autoimmune kind of depletes the body, takes things down, and leads to anxiety and depression. And again, that's sort of assuming the equation we're taking out of this is sort of the trauma, right? Because everybody's got trauma to some degree, it seems, these days, right? Whether it's childhood experiences or something else. And so, that's just another element in there. Like, did you have trauma? How much trauma did you have? And then again, somebody might start with a Hashimoto's and then move into anxiety and depression as part of it, because especially like with Hashimoto's, that's the thyroid, right? It's tyrosine, it's impacting tyrosine. You seem to need more tyrosine. And tyrosine is a precursor to dopamine, which is your neurotransmitter, right? So if it makes a lot of sense that someone could get depressed. And that's the cool thing. Well, it's not a cool thing. Depression can be like low dopamine, it can be low serotonin, it can be either one. Efficiency. So it's just about
it was nerd speak
balance.
for you when you're like, it's a cool thing.
I know. That was totally the nerd.
Yeah. I thank you for mentioning that. It doesn't always have to be one way or the other, with autoimmune disease, either mental health or autoimmune disease. I've heard, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I've heard that many times you see the mental health issues show up first before you get the physical symptoms of autoimmune disease.
Mm-hmm.
Your
And I think it
opinion?
depends on the person. I mean, some people are really in touch with their body and really noticing these things, and other people just aren't. And they just don't notice until it's like this, like the iceberg in front of them. They're like, I didn't notice it. I didn't notice all these little things, or a lot of time I see here, like, oh, well, those are common symptoms. Everybody has those symptoms. I'm like, do they? Does everybody have symptoms? Or is it just that you think because it's so common that it's just part of aging or part of you? Those are always what I call the whispers, right? The whispers that there's something going on. The universe is trying to tell you, like, you should pay attention to this.
Yeah, it's a whisper, and then it's a knock on the door, and then it's the car horn, it keeps on getting
Exactly.
louder and louder until you can't ignore it anymore. How long does it take for a person to heal from when you start working with them to, till they don't need you anymore?
Yeah, it's such a great question because it can take a long time. So this 70-year-old that I was describing earlier, I've been working with him for over a year, but he's been sick for, 50 plus years. So it really just depends on the person, how sick they are. And again, it's really just going into their signs and symptoms. Sometimes people, like back in the day when I was working with people, they always come to me for weight loss, and we actually wouldn't even get to their full weight loss goal, but they just felt so much better. They were done. They're like, that's all I need. Thanks, Carrie. Okay, that's great. So it really just depends. This client that I was referring to, he's such a trooper, but he's been sick for a really long time, and he's been to many, many doctors. So again, it depends on so much. It's tricky because it takes a lot of energy to take care of yourself, to heal. And so it takes a lot of drive. It takes a lot of belief in yourself and to know that you're healing and this is the way to heal. It takes money. It takes a lot of factors. So everybody's different in their journey. But I try my best to get people feeling better right away. I want to see some positive sign right away. I do have a client right now. It's taken her about 6 months to notice a positive sign. But again, I think that has more to do with her identity. So we have to kind of get into the mindset stuff. Like, why aren't you noticing, right? Like, you're not noticing these things. And then it's also having things to measure beforehand. So if I don't really like to work with people with weight loss if that's their primary goal. Usually is a factor in all cases, but if it's their primary goal, I don't like to work with that. But I would say, as an example, like, let's measure it. So blood work is a great example. Blood work is something that's easy to get. Most people can get a CBC with differential or a metabolic panel from the regular doctor. And with that, we can look at the panel and see how things are going. Is this still working for you, right? And I think people need that. I'm a nerd. I like to see the numbers. And so someone looks at their blood work and I can tell them what markers are off. And then we test it 6 months later and then things are better. And then again, it just depends on, do they feel better enough or do they want to really resolve this? Like my 70-year-old, for instance, he's such a cute nerd, but he literally has a spreadsheet and he's been tracking his blood on this one spreadsheet since 1988. And I'm not joking. And he's got that.
Oh.
And his white blood count has been low, meaning his immune system has been suppressed since 1988. And this was the first year, us working together, was the first time it came into normal range. But it took a lot of work. Like if I show you like all the work he's doing, but he's so driven. He so wants to feel better. He's just super motivated. He wants to feel better. So yeah, so it can do. But it's nice to have some kind of measurement to figure out how long it takes. But it's, who knows? So it's so many factors, right? Like I can tell you to do things that then, are you a Prius? You're going to go from here to here, it's going to take you a day. Or are you a Tesla? And you're going to go from here to here in 60, right? Again, it depends on how sick you are, how much you've been doing, how sensitive you are. People that are really sensitive have to go so slow. You can only put in one drop at a time, whereas other people, you can put in a whole dropper full and get them better. So it just really depends on the journey. It depends on how sick they are, how long they've been sick. Usually, I think the people that are super sensitive like that, first of all, their nervous systems are very sensitive. And also it means that their livers are just very stagnant and sluggish. And so it really takes a lot of cleaning out the liver with really real food first to get them feeling better before you can really shift the dial on things. So it just really varies from person to person, and it varies from, again, their ability to do the work. Because they're the one. I'm just the guide on the side, right? It's the client that has to really do the work.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I'm glad that you mentioned that it does take a lot of energy. It does take a lot of time. It does take a lot of resilience on the part of the client, and of course, money. I mean, nothing is free or easy. I mean, not only with the coaching and your work, but on the part of them, buying certain foods that they're not used to, and it is. And it sounds like you're very patient with them. You see who they are, and you try to accommodate what they need.
Yeah, I'm really good with both hand holding. I'm really good with people that are, really sensitive and need to just go really slow. Yeah, it's become my specialty, I would say.
Yeah, I think you have to if you're in the health field, and it sounds like you're doing the right work. As far as what is going on with mental health, fatigue, and autoimmune disease, as far as what is going on in the body?
It's such a great question. Fatigue is a symptom I've seen from the get-go, right? I sort of thought about, again, I would say when I started, I was actually focusing on fatigue. And then I sort of switched to anxiety and depression just because I've got my own mental, curiosity about that, because it's such a brain thing. But fatigue can be anything from nutrient deficiencies to, again, these pathogens that are just weighing down our body, right? And in addition to not getting the right nutrients in place, right? Or I have a client that started on carnivore. She's in her 60s. She's on carnivore, and she was on carnivore for 3 years. Well, she's one of those super sensitive people, and she already had like an overflowing liver, right? Like it's super congested and super stagnant and just not working well. And so it's going to take a lot more to get her to feeling better. But we have to get a couple things into her. Glucose, right? Because most people that have symptoms, being on keto or carnivore doesn't usually work because they're deficient in vitamin C, they're deficient in glucose, depending on if they're eating vegetables, right? And the vegetables are where you're going to get your minerals. So that's what I see is that I can totally nerd out and talk about the Krebs cycle, right? It's like you have to be able to methylating first, and then to detoxify, and then further down the genetic chain is the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle, your ability to make energy, right? Which kind of goes into like ATP and mitochondria and things like that. And so you need the right nutrients, you need the right fuel, you need the right supplements, you need all the pieces to be working together. And so if you aren't methylating, for instance, you're not going to have energy, right? So there's so many steps in that process. Again, it goes back to bioindividuality. I want to look at the person. Okay, when did the fatigue start? Tell me about your fatigue. Is your fatigue consistent across the day? Could it be related to blood sugar? Do you actually get tired after you eat? I've had people say, no matter what I eat, I get tired, right? So then it's like, oh, let's look at what you're eating, not only what you're eating, but how you're eating, when you're eating. It's the combinations of things, right? It's the order of things. The order matters, and the details matter to figure out what's going on. So fatigue, I think about, again, a need for glucose, a need for hydration and minerals. Again, is for some reason it's not getting into the cell. And I see that a lot when there's too much fat in the diet. I feel like, especially now, right? In the 80s, we started that, low fat time, right? But then it was like high sugar and crap food, right? A lot of processed food and snackables. And then we swung the other way and we're like, no, fat is good for you. Fat's great. Well, fat is good for you. It's not that it's bad for you. It's just that the liver doesn't prefer that. Like, it's not a fuel source for the liver. The liver needs glucose. And then our livers are because there's so many toxins and pathogens out there, our livers are overflowing. They can't make glucose. We've run out of glucose, and the stress, I would say. Also, the stress is making a lot of adrenaline, right? Adrenaline is very acidic to the body, and so that's wearing us down. There's just so many factors at play. It's really complicated to talk, as you can see, to talk about fatigue, of what's going on in the body. So again, similar root causes, it's got some kind of pathogen and toxin. But then again, it's how long has this been going on, and when did it start, and things like that. Because I do see a lot of long COVID. So, and again, that would be primarily viral that started that. It was just the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will. But they could have been having underlying deficiencies that happened before they got the virus. We're not eating well before they got the virus.
It's so interesting that you have to really dig and really listen to what these clients are telling you and telling you that they're doing and how long these symptoms have been going on. I mean, you have to be you're pretty much playing detective and trying to figure out what is going on and getting all those details from them. And it's not like you can follow them with a video camera. I mean, maybe you could ask them, but I don't know. Yeah. It would be kind of boring.
I call it art, right? So I assess them, and then I make a recommendation, and then we track. And then we meet every couple of weeks, and I go, okay, well, how did that go? What's better? What's worse, right? I want to know, because it's all trial and error, right? And not everybody's different. And so it's like, okay, what's working? What didn't work? Okay, so if you fell off, then what can happen? I mean, the journey of healing is definitely like this, right? It's not linear. And so if they fall off, you get curious. They're like, okay. And they're like, oh God, Carrie, I had to have fat. I had to bring these fat. I had to have this muffiny thing, or it was a birthday party and I did whatever. And it's not about beating them up. It's about it's all information. So if someone's craving sugar, I get really curious. I go, okay, are you craving sugar? Then maybe you're eating too much fat and you're not getting the good sugars in. You're not getting the fruits, and you're not getting the starchy carbs and the things that you need that are going to be really sugary full glucose fuel that your body needs. Or again, eating in a way where it can't get into the cell. If there's too much fat, it's going to compete with getting the glucose in the cell.
Interesting. And this is where it'll be our section where it's our tool time. And if you don't mind, please talk about 3 easy tools that the audience can do if they're suffering from fatigue. And I know it's not that easy, but if you have any simple things that people can try.
Yeah, we can talk about supplements. I guess I'm kind of a supplement junkie, so I'll talk about the supplements. So almost everybody I feel is deficient in B vitamins. So the number one B vitamin would be B12. This is so important for our nervous system, which again can impact the fatigue. So B12 in a sublingual form. And again, I like if you don't react to methylcobalamin, you can do that. But there's 2 actually forms of B12. One is adenosine and one is methyl. And methyl helps you methylate, and adenosine helps your mitochondria. So you kind of need both. And so there's a precursor form to that called hydroxy B12. And so I like to bring in a sublingual hydroxy B12 in a pretty high dose. You're going to bring in like 2,000 plus micrograms, whereas the RDA is 2.5. But, the RDA means nothing, that they have not updated that in years, right? And to bring in some B12, that would be number 1. Number 2, let's see. I would bring in if you don't react to methyls, and if you're not methylating well, you might react to methyl B complexes, but I would recommend a methylated B complex for sure. And the third one would be hard. I would almost say hydrate. I did a chronic fatigue video. I have a YouTube channel, and I did a chronic fatigue video on hydration. And that would be really good because, again, it's not as simple as, Carrie, I'm drinking a gallon of water every day, but why aren't I hydrated? And again, it could be that's too much fat and making the blood thick. And then the blood can't get the water and the hydration, the oxygen, and all the other nutrients that you need from the blood into your cell, right? That's idea of your blood is it carries nutrients from your liver out to your blood. Your liver filters it, processes it, and then sends it out to the cells in your body through your blood system. And so if you aren't, if there's either too much acid or too much fat or things like that, it's not going to get in there. And so again, I would suggest watching that YouTube video for sure on hydration.
And how about number 3?
So I said B12, B complex, and hydration. So the reason I say a B complex on
okay.
Yeah. Okay. The reason I say a B complex on top of B12, because again, the amount of B12 in a complex isn't enough. And yeah, you just need more.
Okay. That's good to know. How about providing 3 foods that have a positive impact on depression or anxiety?
This is awesome. Can we do 2 food groups within that? There's a bunch of foods. That be okay?
Yeah, let's do that.
Right. So again, kind of going back to the minerals, right? So in order to hydrate, you need minerals on board. A lot of times people will go for an electrolyte, but what you need is minerals. So I would say like leafy greens is number 1. And then some other ideas for that would be, I love green juices like cucumber juice and celery juice. They're super hydrating. They're just like nature's best electrolyte. And then the other one is, again, glucose is in our low carb keto carnivore kind of world that we seem to be living in. People are resorting to those diets for a reason, because people they're relieving symptoms, but they're quieting symptoms, but they're not healing you. So going back to that, I would say glucose. So bringing in, bananas, apples, oranges, sweet potatoes. Again, those are things I think a lot of people are avoiding those foods because they think they're bad carbohydrates.
Girl, I love me some sweet potatoes. How about the foods that would have a negative impact on the body?
I would say glucose or wheat based and dairy, eggs, and I would say excess fat, but specifically like avoiding canola oils specifically, but overall just reducing your fat. Now, the trick here from a mental emotional state is that when you are not feeling good, you crave what you crave, mac and cheese, right? And so mac and cheese is gluten and dairy, right? And so that's what you crave because those foods have this opioid. They trigger this opioid in the brain. It's called gluteomorphines or casomorphines. And it's triggering this in the brain and making you feel good and calm in that moment. But long term, it's actually feeding pathogens. So that's why we want to take it out, because we don't want to feed the pathogens. We want to get rid of them.
That's very interesting. I've always heard that your body gives you signals to what you should be eating, and it just may not be. Now that you mentioned that, it just may not be the right one.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or that's what you think of. Yeah.
Of course.
Maybe not the processed foods.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point because I do really want people to get in touch. That's one of the things that I do with clients. I really want them to get in touch with their own intuition and their own inner knowing, but also have the framework of knowledge out there, which is that, there's no nutrition in gluten and dairy. Same thing, right? It creates a lot of mucus in the body. It does a couple things. It creates mucus. It also is the bad combination of fat and sugar. It's got the lactose and sugar. And so by nature, it's a bad combination of food. And it's just going to thicken your blood, unfortunately.
I do have a question, though. What about your thoughts on raw dairy? Because I know you said that dairy, gluten. What was the other thing you mentioned?
Or specifically, industrial seed oils.
Okay. Yeah, what are your thoughts on raw dairy?
Yeah, if you're a person that doesn't have symptoms, sure, raw dairy is good. But if you're listening to this podcast, I'm guessing you have an autoimmune issue, which means that dairy isn't good. But yeah, if, the best quality dairy, might be raw dairy, but it's still going to have too much fat. It's going to have the combination of fat and sugar. It's going to create mucus in the body. And it's unfortunately, it's just not a healing food. It's, it's meant to fatten cows, I think. I know. And that's a hard one for people to let go of. Like, I get people that say, I cannot let go of my cheese. I go, okay, we're going to work around the cheese. You keep the cheese in now. We're going to build the scaffolding. And we'll see if we can take you off cheese.
Yeah, that's been the hardest one for me. And if you can give one simple recipe for people that have mental health or autoimmune disease or fatigue, what would that
Yeah.
be?
I love a smoothie. This is my go-to because it's super easy to do. Anybody can do, and it's just super yummy and easy. So I like to make a smoothie with wild blueberries. Regular blueberries are fine, but wild blueberries are even better because they have 2 or 3 times the antioxidant levels of regular blueberries. And they're pretty accessible. Almost every freezer section of every grocery store I found wild blueberries. So I would say 2 cups of wild blueberries, and then a whole orange, again, for the glucose. It could be a tangerine or an orange. And again, if that's too much, you can lower it or increase it, whatever. Again, following your intuition around my suggestions. And then the last one is cilantro. And cilantro is amazing for detoxing heavy metals and other toxins in the body. And it's nice. It just has a nice flavor mix with that. And so I would say either a bunch or half a bunch of cilantro in there. And then you could thin it with some coconut water. That way you'll notice that combination, there's no fat in that. And so if you have that first thing in the morning, you're going to digest it really well because there's no fat that's in your stomach. And fat and fruit digests in about an hour. So that should digest really quickly.
And before you go, so you can have either glucose or fat, but not glucose and fat together, sounds like.
Right. Exactly.
Is that what you're
So
saying?
you like sweet potatoes,
okay.
right? Yeah. So you know what I love on a sweet potato is salsa, because you've got the sweetness of the potato and then you've got some salsa. And that way, if you want something on it, right, as opposed to putting butter on your sweet potato, you could also do some kind of tomato sauce. But you can also just, if you can eat sweet potato by itself, that would be great. But, sweet potato, like away from animal protein, away from any kind of, again, butter, fat, any kind of fat, that's ideal. That way it's going to be more easily assimilated into your body.
Okay, because of the liver and the, just the energy, or like because we were talking about fatigue. Is that what you were saying? Got you.
Sometimes that can, if you have blood sugar. Sorry, I was going to say, if you have liver issues or pancreas issues, your then having the fat with the sugar can be a problem. It can actually cause fatigue. Like if I eat a combination of fat and sugar, sometimes like within an hour, like it messes with my blood sugar and I get that crash, blood glucose crash.
Gotcha. Huh. Interesting. All right. Well, I appreciate your time. And how can people learn more about you? And
they can go to anxietydepressionrecoveryguide.com. And there I've got a beautiful recovery guide that I've given you that has tips, tricks, recipes, and everything you need to get you started on the journey of healing.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Desiree. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Autoimmune Warriors and others. I really appreciate your support and listening. I want you to be aware of 4 companies. One is Isla Health. They make it easy and helpful to track your lifestyle to reduce flares. But it's more than a tracking app. Isla Health uses data to develop a personalized care plan that works for your life. So why not check it out? Number 2, Adapt Naturals by Chris Kresser. I'm excited to let you know about BioAvail Multi. It gives you the full spectrum of ingredients that you need to thrive, like essential vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. So go to adaptnaturals/DES15. Use my code DES15, DEZ, to get 15% off your first order. And number 3, it is a autoimmune community, Brightly Thrive. Yes, it is an inclusive, fun space to learn, grow, heal, and shine brightly with others that are facing autoimmune challenges just like you. And last but not least is Leap Cure. Check out how you can benefit from their company and what their latest clinical trial is. So, thank you so much, and be stronger than autoimmune. Until next time. Guess who I just connected with, warriors? Leap Cure. Leap what? Leap Cure. Leap Cure connects patients with clinical trials to make research more equitable, and efficient. Listen to their latest clinical trial.
If you've been diagnosed with thyroid eye disease and are seeking potential new treatment options, you might be interested in the LIDS clinical trial. If you're 18 and over, have a diagnosis of Graves' disease or Hashimoto's, and are interested in potentially participating in research, you can fill out a short questionnaire at lpcur.com/TED. You'll be connected with someone on the team to determine whether it might be a good fit for you. Check your eligibility and learn more at lpcur.com/TED.